The final line of code blinked across my monitor. A quiet spark that completed 21 years of devotion. My shoulders sagged as the prototype came to life, the numbers stabilizing, the system breathing on its own for the very first time. $870 million. That was the figure the board had repeated in every meeting. They called it the project that would secure the company's future. Pride should have lifted me higher. Instead, fatigue pressed down like a lead blanket. Nights of caffeine, days blurred together, anniversaries missed. It all pooled behind my tired eyes. I leaned back, just for a moment, to take in what had been built. It wasn't just a machine. It was a reflection of every hour I had sacrificed, every promise I had broken to my family, every ounce of myself I had poured into this place. Behind me, whispers drifted like drafts under a closed door. Younger employees, clustered near the glass wall, spoke in tones they thought I couldn't hear. They say the CEO's about to clear out senior staff, make way for his nephew. Their words carried the casual cruelty of gossip, but each syllable struck like a hammer. I forced myself to ignore it, fixing my gaze on the glowing dashboard. This was my proof. Whatever politics swirled above, no one could take this moment away from me. Or so I believed. Hello, friends. I'm glad you're here with me. Where are you listening from today? Take a moment to roll your shoulders slowly backward 3 times. It helps release the tension you didn't even realize you were carrying. If this story resonates, please like and subscribe to the channel to continue listening to the next stories. The door opened without warning. My manager, crisp suit and expressionless face, stepped in with a single envelope in hand. He didn't look at the humming prototype or the scrolling data that marked a breakthrough. He looked only at me. "Molly, she finished her work here," he said, his voice clipped. I stared at the envelope, not comprehending. My hand was still resting on the keyboard where the final command line lingered. The room felt suddenly colder, the pride in my chest collapsing into something jagged and hollow. I had imagined applause, maybe even a handshake, instead. My triumph lasted less than 2 minutes before it was stripped bare. I had delivered them the future, and in the same breath, they delivered me my end. The sunlight hit me harder than I expected as I stepped out of the building, clutching the envelope in my hand like a stone that burned through my skin. My legs moved on instinct, one foot in front of the other, but it felt as though the ground had been yanked away. Just behind me, through the revolving glass doors, a swell of applause broke out. It rolled like thunder, building and echoing up the atrium walls. They weren't clapping for me. They were clapping for the young man stepping into my role, the CEO's nephew, the one they whispered about. I didn't need to turn my head to know the ovation belonged to him. Every step away from that applause felt heavier, like dragging chains across concrete. 21 years of devotion, and in the end, my exit was swallowed by someone else's standing ovation. I forced myself to breathe, to keep walking, to not let the trembling in my hands show. The envelope cut into my palm, its weight far larger than the paper inside. My phone buzzed. A small, familiar hope sparked for a moment. Maybe someone cared enough to reach out. But when I opened the message, it wasn't comfort. It was a warning. "We're not allowed to contact you. Please don't reply. They're watching." I stopped dead on the sidewalk, the words blurring as if I had forgotten how to read. These were colleagues I had mentored, laughed with, fought deadlines alongside. Now they were too afraid to speak to me, reduced to whispers through text that told me I was untouchable. The sting wasn't in the silence. It was in the fact that they wanted to reach out, but couldn't. Isolation wrapped around me, cold and suffocating. I pushed the phone back into my bag, gripping it harder than necessary, as if the pressure could keep me from falling apart. My pulse pounded in my ears. "Keep moving, Molly, just keep moving." Then it happened. As I reached the security gate, I swiped my badge out of habit. The small red light blinked, followed by a flat electronic tone. "Access denied." I swiped again. Same result. One more try. More desperate than rational. The gate didn't budge. The guard at the desk barely looked up. "It's been deactivated," he muttered, as though reciting a fact from a weather report. No sympathy, no pause. Just procedure. The reality hit me harder than the applause or the text message. They hadn't just fired me. They had erased me. My ID card was no longer valid. My name no longer in their system. It was as though I had never existed inside those walls. I slipped the badge into my pocket, my fingers tightening around it like it was a relic of a life already buried. The cheers behind me grew louder, muffled by the glass. But I felt none of it. Just shock, cold and unrelenting, leaving me hollow as I walked away from the place I once called my second home. The farther I walked from the building, the more the silence pressed in on me. It was a silence I hadn't felt in decades. No phones buzzing with demands. No urgent messages dragging me back to the office. No late-night alarms pulling me from bed. Just emptiness. At first, it felt unbearable. Then, as I stood at the corner waiting for the light to change, memories began to crowd in like ghosts I had kept locked away. 21 years. That number looped in my mind. 21 years of dinners gone cold on the table, of birthdays celebrated without me, of anniversaries cut short with the promise that next year will be different. I had given Ridgewell Technologies not just my skill, but my life, piece by piece, until I wasn't sure where Molly ended and the company began. I remembered the storm one winter, when servers threatened to collapse under the weight of outages, and I soldered wires by flashlight through the night. I remembered my daughter's piano recital I missed that same week, her face falling when she saw the empty seat. Those sacrifices were supposed to mean something, some security, some recognition, some belief that loyalty still mattered. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a warning from a colleague. It was a message from my daughter. "Mom, will you be at the play tonight? Please say yes." The words pierced deeper than any corporate rejection. For years I had rehearsed excuses. "I'll try." "Honey, I can't promise. I'm so sorry." But now, there was no meeting, no crisis, no chain around my neck. I typed slowly, fingers trembling. "Yes, I'll be there." I leaned against a lamppost, letting the tears come. They weren't loud, just quiet streaks sliding down cheeks that had grown used to staying dry in public. The sorrow wasn't only for what I had lost that morning. It was for the decades I couldn't get back, the dinners I hadn't shared, the moments I had missed, the memories I had traded away for the promise of belonging. And for what? A letter in an envelope, but as grief tightened around me, another realization pushed through. The company could delete my ID, strip my access, even forbid colleagues from speaking to me. Yet there was one thing they could never erase. My name etched in ink, my signature on the design that powered the very prototype they now paraded as their crown jewel. I touched the badge still in my pocket, a dead piece of plastic, and thought of the legal documents stored in my private vault. They thought they had cut me out clean. They thought I was disposable, but they had overlooked the simplest truth. They could fire me, but they couldn't erase the fact that the blueprint, the soul of the system, still carried only my name. For the first time since stepping out of that building, I straightened my shoulders. The sorrow didn't vanish, but behind it, something steadier began to rise. When I finally reached home, the apartment felt smaller than I remembered, as though the walls themselves knew I no longer belonged to the world I had lived in for 2 decades. I dropped my bag onto the couch, the envelope sliding out like a reminder I wanted to burn. Instead, I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the blank login screen of my private vault. My pulse quickened. For years, I had kept it hidden, tucked away like an insurance policy I hoped I'd never need. Now, it was the only thread left connecting me to what I had built. I typed in the password, each keystroke deliberate. The vault opened with a familiar hum. There it was, the master design file, the blueprint of the $870 million prototype, not just saved, but secured under my name. Alongside it sat folders, patent filings, licensing terms, compliance notes, all stamped with the same truth: my digital signature. I leaned closer, as if the glow from the screen could steady my breathing. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down harder than the pride could lift me. I could close the vault, walk away, and finally give my daughter what she deserved: a mother present at every play, every birthday, every dinner. I could build a quiet life where no CEO's whim decided my worth. Part of me longed for that peace, the kind I had denied myself for too long. But another part, sharper, louder, argued back. If I walked away now, my 21 years would be reduced to nothing but silence. They hadn't just fired me, they had humiliated me, paraded someone else into my place before the applause had even faded. Could I really let them rewrite the story? Erase me from the very system I had bled into? The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for me to choose. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, torn between erasing everything or digging deeper. My heart raced with the battle: family or justice, rest or dignity. Then a notification popped up in the corner of the screen. My breath caught as the system automatically refreshed the status of my filings. Confirmed. Patent rights active since 6 months prior. Legal owner, Molly Davis. I stared at the words until they steadied me. 6 months. Half a year where the world had already recognized my authority, even as Ridgewell treated me like nothing. They could delete my ID badge, but they couldn't delete this. Quietly, I closed the laptop. The hesitation still lingered, but beneath it, a calm determination began to settle. I didn't need to shout, or storm their offices, or beg for respect. I already held the key. The world would see it soon enough. What do you think happens next? Will Molly finally unleash the power she's been holding back? Or will the CEO try one more desperate move? Stay with me until the end of this story. You won't want to miss how it all turns out. The morning after I opened my vault, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. For a split second, I considered ignoring it, but the urgency inside me pushed my thumb across the screen. "This is Halifax Bank," the voice said. Firm, professional, with an edge of strain that betrayed something deeper. "Ms. Davis, I'm calling regarding Ridgewell Technologies' prototype launch. Our compliance review shows the system is incomplete. Specifically, authorization is missing your digital signature. Without it, we cannot release the funding. Can you clarify?" I froze in my chair, the air in the room tightening around me. Halifax Bank wasn't just any investor. They were the lifeline. Without their money, Ridgewell's promises to the market would collapse like wet paper. Yet the weight of his words pressed down like a stone on my chest. Clarify. If I admitted too much, I'd be painted as the saboteur, the bitter ex-employee seeking revenge. If I said nothing, they might still find a way to spin this against me. My hand trembled as I held the phone. Memories of the HR officer's cold eyes flooding back, effective immediately. Even now, I could hear those words in the hollow cadence of dismissal. If I spoke carelessly, the company would drag me into court, frame me as the obstacle, smear me as unstable. The thought of being paraded as a villain in front of the world made my stomach knot. "I no longer work for Ridgewell," I said slowly, measuring each word as if they might explode. "You'll need to speak to them directly." A pause crackled through the line. I could almost hear the banker adjusting his tie, rethinking the figures on his screen. Then, cautiously, "So to confirm, you will not be authorizing the release?" I closed my eyes, inhaled once. This was the moment. My daughter's text from the night before lingered in my mind. Her hope for me to finally be present. I couldn't let fear drive me anymore. The truth was simple, unshakable, and simplicity was the sharpest blade. I steadied my voice. "Ask the company why they don't have my signature." Silence. Not the silence of dismissal or indifference, but the silence of realization. He had the answer he needed, and we both knew it when the call ended. I sat perfectly still, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. That one sentence, just 13 words, was enough to shift the ground beneath Ridgewell's empire. It wasn't an outburst, not a confession, not even an accusation. It was a question that would ricochet through every boardroom and investor call they held that day. I set the phone down gently, though my hands still shook. The tension inside me had not broken, but it had changed. It was no longer the weight of fear. It was the live current of a fuse just lit. That afternoon, as I sat with my laptop open but untouched, the live news feed caught my eye. The camera was trained on Ridgewell's glass tower, where reporters swarmed like bees outside a hive. Inside, at the podium, stood the CEO himself, suit pressed, jaw tight, voice rehearsed for the world. "Everything is under control," he declared. His tone carried the same false confidence I'd heard in every quarterly meeting, the same smug assurance that power alone could bend reality. "Our systems remain fully operational, and we are moving forward with the prototype launch as scheduled." Applause echoed from inside the atrium, and for a moment, even the reporters looked disarmed, watching from my couch. I almost admired the performance. He was a man drowning, insisting to everyone that the water was fine. Yet I knew what he didn't want anyone else to see: the cracks widening beneath his polished stage. Messages trickled into my phone from friends still inside the building. One read, "Middle management is pretending they've fixed the access issue. They're running simulations, faking logs, anything to keep their jobs." Another, "Everyone is terrified. They know the system won't move without you, but they can't admit it." I pictured the scene clearly: nervous managers scrambling to fabricate proof of progress, sending doctored screenshots up the chain while avoiding questions that might reveal the truth. All the while, the nephew, the golden successor, likely stood in the wings, his hands shaking as he tried to memorize talking points fed to him minutes before. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt something unexpected stir inside me. Not anger, not grief, but a quiet satisfaction. They thought they had written me out of the story, but my absence was louder than my presence had ever been. For several hours, their illusion held. The stock price steadied. Journalists repeated the CEO's words without challenge. Commentators on financial networks speculated that Ridgewell had endured a minor hiccup, but was back on track. Watching it unfold, I could almost imagine an alternate world where I had doubted myself, believed their charade, and accepted defeat. But the truth doesn't stay buried. By early evening, the first alert broke across my screen. "Halifax bank statement. Prototype launch. Delayed indefinitely pending authorization." The words scrolled in, bold across every financial ticker. Stark and undeniable. Within minutes, analysts erupted, markets jolted. Reporters outside Ridgewell's tower shoved microphones toward the doors, demanding answers. The CEO's earlier bravado now played on split screens beside the breaking news banner. His voice, "Everything is under control," looped again and again, each repetition cutting deeper into his credibility. What had been his attempt at reassurance was now a public confession of deceit. I leaned back, letting the irony wash over me. For weeks, months, years, I had kept my head down, solving problems no one else could solve, absorbing blows in silence. And now, without lifting a finger, their empire was unraveling on live television. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was quieter, subtler, a satisfaction that didn't need to shout. The world was finally seeing what I had always known. Control was never his. It had always been mine. The phone rang just after dusk, its vibration low and insistent against the wooden table. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew instinctively who it was before I picked up. For a moment, I let it ring, savoring the silence I now controlled. Then, with a steady breath, I answered. Molly! The CEO's voice filled my ear, a blend of forced calm and urgency. We need to put the past aside. This situation has gotten unnecessarily complicated. Let's resolve it. I said nothing. The quiet on my end stretched long enough that he cleared his throat, searching for composure. We are prepared to compensate you very generously, he continued, his tone dipping into the patronizing register he once used in board meetings. All we ask is that you release your signature. Think of this as an opportunity. You can walk away wealthy, free from any bitterness. I could almost see him, pacing behind his desk, rehearsing every line as though it might bend me. Once, his words might have carried weight. Now, they felt hollow, like coins dropped into an empty jar. Before I could respond, another message lit up my screen, a text from a former colleague, one I had mentored years ago. Please, Molly, hundreds of employees are scared. They're innocent in this. If you don't sign, they might lose everything. The weight of it pressed on me harder than the CEO's offer. These weren't faceless names on payrolls. They were people I had stayed late with, people whose weddings I had missed birthdays for, people who had carried me through impossible deadlines. To punish the company was one thing, but to risk hurting them, my people, was another matter entirely. My hand tightened around the phone. For a moment, doubt crept in, whispering that maybe I should give in, maybe I should sacrifice again for the sake of others. It was a temptation I knew too well. For 21 years, I had done exactly that. But then I remembered the envelope, the way my manager hadn't even looked at the humming prototype as he handed me my dismissal. I remembered the applause behind the glass. Not for me, but for the CEO's nephew stepping into a spotlight I had built. The bridge had already burned. They hadn't left room for negotiation or dignity. They had chosen humiliation. I lifted the phone back to my ear. My voice came out calm, steady, carrying a finality I didn't need to raise. The bridge was burned the moment you signed my termination papers, I said. There was silence on the other end, stunned, heavy, for once. The man who had held power over my life for decades had nothing left to say. I ended the call myself, pressing the button with deliberate care. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to their choices. I was making mine. The quiet power in that decision filled me more than any applause ever could. The days that followed moved like shifting ground beneath my feet. Each morning brought a new headline. Each evening, another plunge in Ridgewell's stock price. What had once been a fortress of stability was now unraveling in plain sight. Investors who had spoken with conviction about the company's future were quietly selling off their shares. Long-standing clients froze contracts, waiting for someone to prove the system was viable. Every loss they suffered should have brought me satisfaction. And yet, the satisfaction came tangled with something heavier. Late one night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the inbox filling faster than I could clear it. At first, I thought the flood of messages might be taunts or accusations. Instead, they were confessions. Small notes of solidarity from people still trapped inside Ridgewell's glass tower. You were the best mentor I ever had. They'll never admit it. But the system lived because of you. We're rooting for you quietly. Don't think for a second that we've forgotten everything you gave. Please don't let them bury your name. We can't say this out loud, but we're with you. Reading them made my chest tighten. These weren't just colleagues. They were people who had trusted me, leaned on me, believed in me when the deadlines piled up like storms. Their words felt like lifelines tossed across a widening gulf. But the more I read, the deeper the conflict grew. To stand my ground meant watching them endure the fallout. Was I punishing the guilty or dragging the innocent with them? The phone rang again, this time with a softer voice. A reporter I recognized, someone known for peeling back corporate facades, introduced herself. Ms. Davis, she said gently, I know what Ridgewell is claiming. I've seen what investors are whispering, but I also know you filed documentation months ago. If you're willing to speak, we can put the truth on record. We can make sure the world sees your name. I sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. To go public would be irreversible. The company would brand me a traitor. Friends inside might lose even more if I exposed what I knew. But the alternative, letting their narrative harden into fact, was unbearable. I'm not interested in revenge, I said finally, but the truth deserves air. The interview was brief, measured. I offered no insults, no theatrics, only the facts, my documentation, my signature, the dates of filing. The reporter's pen moved quickly, her nods slow and deliberate. When she left, I wondered if I had just set the final match to the bridge. The next morning, I didn't have to wonder anymore. Across every newsstand, every glowing screen, the headline stretched in bold black letters. The prototype bears only Molly Davis's signature. For a long moment, I just stared, the words sinking in. My name, once buried beneath years of silence and sacrifice, was now the centerpiece of the story they had tried so hard to control. The world was no longer asking if Ridgewell would succeed. The world was asking how they had ever imagined they could succeed without me. Inside, the conflict still twisted. I knew innocent employees would suffer in the fallout. But under that weight was something steady, something unshakable. I had not spoken to destroy. I had spoken to reclaim. And that truth, once printed, could never be erased. The headline hadn't even cooled on the front pages before the emails began to arrive. At first, I thought they would be more quiet notes from frightened employees or journalists fishing for follow-up quotes. Instead, they came from places I had never expected. Executives from rival firms, directors from international consortiums, even private equity groups whose names I had only seen on glossy reports. Each message carried a different tone, but the message beneath was the same. We'd like to speak with you, Ms. Davis. Your expertise is invaluable. Would you consider advising us? I sat at my dining table, reading through the offers. The same table where I had once wept over missed recitals and cold dinners. My hands no longer trembled. For years, I had been tethered to one company, convinced my worth lived and died within its walls. Now, those walls had crumbled, and on the other side stood doors I never imagined would open for me. Still, I approached each message carefully. I had no interest in jumping from one cage to another. For the first time in decades, I had the luxury of choice, and choice tasted like freedom. That evening, as I sifted through the proposals, my daughter padded into the room, still in costume from her school play. Her cheeks flushed with the pride of a performance well done. She curled into the chair across from me and watched me quietly, her eyes tracing the open laptop and the unread messages lighting up the screen. Mom, she asked softly, are you going back to them? The question landed heavier than she knew. I thought of the years I had traded away for Ridgewell, the sacrifices I had justified by promising her that it was all for our future. I thought of how many times she had asked if I'd be there, and how many times I had said no. Returning to Ridgewell, even if they begged, even if they doubled their offers, would mean betraying every lesson I hoped she had learned from watching me. I leaned back, studying her, realizing she wasn't just asking for an answer. She was asking for a model of what it meant to reclaim dignity. So I smiled. Not the brittle smile I'd worn to survive in conference rooms, but something lighter, freer. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm not going back. This time, I'll choose a place that values my name, my signature, and everything it represents. Her eyes lit up, and she grinned, clapping her hands together. In that moment, I knew the decision wasn't just about me. It was about showing her that no one had the right to define our worth, but ourselves. The next morning, I replied to one of the offers, not the largest, not the flashiest, but the one that promised something Ridgewell never had: respect. I signed my name at the bottom of the agreement, not with trembling, not with desperation, but with calm certainty. For the first time in 21 years, I felt like I was no longer surviving. I was living. The late afternoon sun spilled across the glass facade of Ridgewell's headquarters as I stood on the opposite sidewalk, watching the chaos unfold. Cameras flashed in rapid succession. Reporters shouted questions over each other, and the once composed CEO now stumbled through the crowd. His polished confidence shattered under the weight of exposure. On the massive screen above the entrance, the headline scrolled in relentless repetition: 800 prototype frozen. I stayed back, half hidden among the onlookers. For years, I had been the invisible force behind their success, the quiet hand keeping systems alive while others claimed the credit. Now, invisibility felt different. It wasn't erasure, it was freedom. I didn't need to stand in front of microphones or defend myself on live television. The truth was already louder than anything I could have said. The crowd gasped suddenly, their attention turning upward. The Ridgewell logo, normally so crisp and commanding, flickered across the building's facade. At first, it seemed like another technical glitch, but then the letters shifted, rearranging themselves in stark, glowing words: authorization missing, Molly Davis. The silence that followed was heavier than the shouts had been. Reporters snapped photos as though capturing history. Employees pressed against the glass from inside, some with shock on their faces, others with something closer to relief. The CEO froze mid-step, his head tilting back to read the words he could never erase. I felt no urge to gloat. The message wasn't for me. It was for them. For everyone who had believed power meant titles, offices, and applause. For everyone who thought a person could be discarded after giving everything. My name had become the symbol they couldn't bury, the proof that loyalty and sacrifice were not theirs to rewrite. For the first time in decades, my chest felt light, the weight of silence, humiliation, and doubt lifted. All that remained was a clear certainty. I was free, and freedom, I realized, was the truest victory of all. Sometimes the battles we fight quietly leave the loudest marks. What do you think? Was Molly right to hold her ground? Or should she have walked away sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if this story resonated, and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey of justice.